Hello, my name is Cynthia Bautista. This assignment is for Psychology 446 Psychobiology at the University of Maine at Presque Isle. Today, I will be showing you an in-depth presentation on the psychobiology of bipolar disorder, focusing on both type 1 and type 2. Over this presentation, we're going to move away from looking at this condition as a personality trait or mood swings, and instead we're going to analyze it as a malfunction of the human brain. I will be guiding you through the complex interactions of the nervous system, the sensory organs, and the endocrine system. And we will explore how the very blueprints of the brain, which is the DNA, and the physical structures contribute to the behaviors associated with bipolar disorder. By the time we finish, you'll have a clear understanding of the biological reality that people face, looking specifically at the so-called glitches in the wiring and the power supply of the brain cells. Now, this presentation is designed to meet all 4 core competencies of psychobiology by providing a literal map of the disorder's physical footprint in the human body. Here, we're going to be talking about some core objectives. So we have 4 main goals today. Each corresponds to a specific competency learning outcome. First, we will establish a foundation in the structure and function of neurons, which are the basic units of our nervous system. Second, we will look at how the sensory systems are physically altered, changing the way a patient literally perceives light and sound. Third, we will examine the cognitive processes, specifically how the physical degradation of certain brain regions leads to memory issues and brain fog. And finally, we will use all of this info and put it into a complete biological profile of bipolar disorder, including the genetics and the internal hormonal clocks that regulate our daily lives. This is not just a psychological overview, but it's a physiological deep dive into the human's brain's response to this chronic illness. Okay, so now going into bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. To understand the biology, we need to first define the 2 main types of bipolar disorder. Now, bipolar 1 is characterized by at least 1 full manic episode, manic being a state of extreme physiological arousal that lasts for a minimum of 7 days. And during this time, the brain is in a state of hyperactivity where the heart rate increases, and there is no need for sleep, and also the metabolism shifts. Bipolar 2 is different because it involves hypomania, which is a less intense version of arousal that is still higher than the baseline, paired with much more frequent and severe depressive episodes. Biologically, both types represent a failure of homeostasis, which is the body's ability to keep its internal environment stable. In a bipolar brain, the thermostat that regulates energy and mood is broken. Instead of maintaining a steady temperature of 72 degrees, the brain fluctuates wildly between 100 degrees and freezing cold. And this causes physical stress to every system in the body. Bipolar disorder affects roughly 2.8% of the adult population in the United States, which is millions of people living with this illness. The average age of onset is about 25 years old, which is a critical period when the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for logic, this is finishing its development. It is a universal disorder that doesn't discriminate based on race, gender, or socioeconomic status, which further proves the biological nature. While environmental stress can trigger the first episode, the underlying vulnerability is already written into the person's physical makeup. This suggests that bipolar disorder is not caused by life events, but rather that life events act as a catalyst for a pre-existing biological condition. Understanding these statistics helps us realize that the scale of the issue and why finding biological treatments is so vital for public health. To understand the big changes, we need to start with the smallest parts, which are the neurons. These are the physical wires of the brain, and there are billions of them, forming a massive network. Each neuron consists of a cell body, dendrites that receive signals, and a long axon that sends them. However, these wires do not actually touch. They are separated by a tiny gap called the synapse. Communication across this gap is not electrical, but chemical. The sending neuron sprays tiny molecules called neurotransmitters across this gap to land on the receivers of the next neuron. This process is happening millions of times every second in your brain right now. In a bipolar brain, the physical structure of these cells or the way they handle these chemicals is compromised. If the spray is too strong or the receivers are too sensitive, the entire messaging system begins to fail, leading to the erratic behaviors. known to be associated with this disorder. In bipolar disorder, the chemicals being sprayed across that gap, specifically dopamine and norepinephrine, are out of balance. Dopamine is the primary chemical responsible for reward and motivation, while norepinephrine handles energy and the fight or flight response. During a manic episode, the brain is flooded with these chemicals, specifically in the reward centers. And this flood makes everything feel exciting and urgent, which explains why manic people often engage in risky behaviors. Their reward system is physically overstimulated. During the depressive phase, these levels drop a lot, leaving the brain without enough fuel to process joy or energy. And this is a literal chemical shortage. The brain's inability to keep these chemicals at a steady level is the first major biological glitch that we see in the bipolar nervous system, and it affects every thought and movement the person makes. Now let's take a look at the cell's inner engine. While these chemicals outside the cell are important, what happens inside the cell is even more so. This is known as the second messenger system. When a neurotransmitter hits a receptor on the outside of a cell, it triggers a chain reaction of proteins inside the cell, specifically G proteins and protein kinase C. In a bipolar brain, this internal power grid is overactive. For example, imagine someone knocks on your front door. A normal reaction is to walk over and open it. But in a bipolar cell, that one knock causes everyone inside the house to start screaming and throwing furniture. The signal is amplified way more than what's necessary. This constant state of internal overreaction keeps the neurons in a state of high stress and prevents them from returning to a calm state. This discovery shifted our understanding of the disorder from a simple chemical imbalance to a deeper issue with how cells process information internally. This internal overactivity is exactly why lithium is the gold standard for treatment. So lithium is a simple salt, which is a basic element that is small enough to physically enter the brain. Once inside, lithium acts like a mute button or a brake on those hyperactive proteins that were making the brain work too hard. It literally slows down the screaming people inside the cell, forcing them to sit down and be quiet. It stabilizes the internal power grid so that the cell no longer overreacts to every neurotransmitter that hits the receptor. This is why lithium takes several weeks to work. It's not just a temporary mask, but a physical retraining of the cell's internal environment. By dampening the internal signaling pathways, lithium prevents the massive electrical storms that lead to mania. This is a literal mechanical fix for a cellular problem. And this proves that medication is a biological tool used to repair a biological malfunction. Now we move to the large-scale structures of the brain for our fourth competency. Now there are two primary areas we need to look at. First, the prefrontal cortex, located behind the forehead, and the amygdala, which is located deep in the center. The prefrontal cortex is the logic center, or the brake of the brain, responsible for making decisions and suppressing urges. The amygdala is the emotion center, or the gas pedal, responsible for the immediate stress response and raw feelings. In a healthy brain, these two areas work in a perfect loop where the logic center keeps the emotion center in check. However, in bipolar disorder, the prefrontal cortex is often physically smaller or has less gray matter density. This means the brake on the car is physically worn down and weak, while the gas pedal is functioning at full power. This structural imbalance makes it physically much harder for a bipolar patient to regulate their emotions compared to a neurotypical person. It isn't just that the logic center is weak, it's also that the wires connecting it to the emotion center are damaged. These wires are called white matter tracks. They're coated in a fatty substance called myelin that allows signals to travel fast and clear. In bipolar patients, studies show that this white matter is often degraded or less dense in the areas that connect the front of the brain to the center. So imagine that you are trying to call someone to tell them to stop an emergency, but the telephone line is full of static, or it's completely cut. Even if the adult logic center is trying to send a calm down signal to the toddler emotion center, the message doesn't get through. This physical disconnect is why a manic person can't simply snap out of it or use logic to stop what they're doing. Their brain lacks the physical infrastructure to transmit that logical command. Our second competency looks at the sensory systems. Bipolar disorder is not just an emotional disorder, it's a sensory processing disorder. The brain has a filter called the thalamus, which acts as a relay station for everything you see, hear, and feel. Its job is to filter out the junk data, like the hum of a refrigerator or the feeling of your socks, so you can focus on important things. In the bipolar brain, this filter or gate fails to function properly. During mood episodes, the thalamus either lets too much information in or not enough. This means the person is literally experiencing a different version of reality through their eyes and ears. This failure is a physical glitch in how the brain organizes raw data from the outside world, leading to the profound sensory changes that we see in patients. During a manic episode, the sensory bouncer goes on a total break, and the gates are thrown wide open. Every single sound, light, and touch is allowed into the brain at full volume. This results in hyperacuity, where a person might report that colors look incredibly vivid and bright, almost like they're glowing. They might be able to hear a clock ticking in the next room as if it were right next to their ear. While this might sound interesting, it's actually physically painful and overwhelming for the brain. Because the brain is being flooded with 200% more data than it can handle, the person becomes extremely distracted and jumpy. They can't focus on a conversation because their brain is giving the same amount of attention to the color of the wall or a bird outside. This is a literal biological overload of the sensory cortex, proving that mania is a full body sensory experience. Now, think of the brain like a TV screen. During a depressive phase, the brightness and volume are turned almost all the way off. The parts of the brain that help us see bright colors and hear beautiful music basically go to sleep, which makes everything in real life look flat, blurry, or gray. This isn't just someone feeling sad. Their brain is physically failing to process the world around them. Because the brain isn't letting any info in, it feels like you are trying to walk through deep water or thick mud just to talk to someone or look at a picture. It's physically exhausting because your brain is ignoring the world, making everything feel boring, muffled, and completely out of reach. Now let's talk about cognition. The brain has a specific structure called the hippocampus, which is essential for memory and learning. You can think of it as the filing cabinet of the brain. It takes the events of your day and files them away so you can find them later. In a healthy person, this filing cabinet is efficient and organized. But the hippocampus is one of the most physically sensitive areas of the brain. It's highly susceptible to changes in body chemistry and stress levels. In bipolar disorder, the constant fluctuation between high and low states puts in a large amount of physical pressure on this region. Over time, this pressure begins to interfere with the brain's ability to process and store information, leading to the cognitive struggles that many patients report even when their mood seems stable. The main reason the memory center struggles is because of a hormone called cortisol. Every time a person enters a manic or depressive episode, the body enters a high stress state and floods the brain with cortisol. In small doses, cortisol is fine, but in high doses over long periods of time, it becomes neurotoxic, meaning it is literally poisonous to brain cells. Research using MRI scans has shown that people who have had bipolar disorder for many years often have a physically smaller hippocampus than healthy people. This shrinkage is caused by the constant acid bath of stress hormones. This is the biological cause of brain fog. When a patient can't remember their keys or struggles to focus at work, it's because their physical filing cabinet has been damaged by the chemistry of bipolar disorder. This highlights why long-term treatment is so important. We need to stop these cortisol floods to protect the brain's physical structure from permanent damage. Now, let's look at the blueprints of the human body, the DNA. Bipolar disorder is one of the most heritable conditions in all of medicine. This means it's passed down through families more than almost any other mental health issue. Studies on identical twins show that if one twin has bipolar disorder, there's up to a 70% chance the other will have it as well. This is because they share the same genetic code. Scientists have identified specific risk genes that are involved in how the brain builds its neurotransmitter receptors and how it regulates its internal clock. It isn't caused by a single bipolar gene, but rather a combination of many tiny glitches in the DNA that make the brain system more fragile. You don't choose to have bipolar disorder any more than you choose your height or eye color. It's a physical inheritance written into your cells before you're even born. The endocrine system is our body's hormone regulator, and it plays a massive role in bipolar disorder through our internal body clock. This clock is in a part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. In a bipolar brain, this clock is physically fragile. We all have a rhythm that tells us when to wake up and when to sleep. But in bipolar patients, this rhythm is easily broken. A single night of no sleep or a change in time zones can cause the internal clock to snap. When the clock breaks, the endocrine system panics and starts pumping out energy hormones like adrenaline and cortisol at the wrong times. This is often what flips the switch into a manic episode. This is why sleep is not just a good idea for these people, but it's a biological necessity to keep their fragile internal clock from causing a total meltdown. When we treat bipolar disorder with medication, we're doing a physical intervention on the brain's electrical and chemical systems. Apart from lithium, many patients take mood stabilizers that were originally designed to treat seizures. These medications work by sitting on the voltage-gated sodium channels of the neurons. Think of it as putting a speed limiter on a car engine. It prevents the neurons from reaching a high enough electrical charge to fire out of control. By managing the electrical threshold of the brain, we prevent the short circuits that lead to mania. Plus, we are now learning that these medications are neuroprotective, meaning they help the brain stay healthy and prevent the shrinking of the hippocampus. The goal of medication is to provide the brain with the stability it can't provide for itself, allowing the physical structures to stay intact and functional over a lifetime. One of the most exciting discoveries in psychobiology is a protein called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. You can think of BDNF as miracle grow or fertilizer for your brain cells. Research has shown that lithium and other mood stabilizers actually increase the levels of this protein in the brain. When BDNF levels go up, the brain starts to repair itself. It can actually regrow the connections that were lost in the logic center and help the memory center get stronger. This is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to physically change and heal. This proves that we aren't just drugging symptoms, we're using medicine to encourage the brain to physically rebuild its own damaged parts. This is a message of hope. With the right biological tools, the bipolar brain has an incredible ability to stabilize and recover its strength. In this slide, I wrote down all the references that I used for the making of this PowerPoint presentation. Feel free to look at them or click the links. To wrap up, we've seen that bipolar disorder isn't just in someone's head. It's a full body medical reality that affects almost every system in the human body. We started by looking at how the brain's electrical wiring gets too sensitive and how the power grid inside each cell starts to glitch, causing the brain to run way too fast. We then saw how the brain's security guard, being the thalamus, stops filtering information correctly.